I went to the last US dietary guidelines because the US dietary guidelines kind of spill over into all of our countries, yours, mine, Australia, New Zealand. And I looked at the evidence that they looked through to try to come up with their guidelines. And they split it into different categories. So they'd look at, in fact, they didn't even look at red meat. They looked at animal proteins. They'd look at animal protein and heart disease, animal protein and different types of cancers, animal protein and diabetes. So I just went through their systematic review systematically. And in every single circumstance, they either hadn't studied red meat or they had found nothing. And these were association studies anyway, so these were not randomized controlled trials. Don't go and eat everyone else's fat, particularly if you've got a weight problem. Don't go stupid, but eat the fat that naturally comes with your food. So if you've got a marbled ribeye or whatever, eat the fat that naturally comes with your ribeye.
Welcome to the Born Unstoppable podcast. I'm Thiago Lasvargi, a family medicine resident in Ontario, Canada. And in this episode, my guest is Zoe Harcombe. Dr. Zoe Harcombe is a researcher, author, blogger, and public speaker in the field of diet and health with a PhD in public health nutrition. Her particular areas of interest and expertise are public health dietary guidelines, especially dietary fat, nutrition, and obesity. Zoe used to be a vegetarian for 20 years before reviewing research that convinced her to switch to a more animal-based diet. In this episode, we cover how to approach nutrition in a systematic and practical way, which leads you to increasing animal proteins. We discuss the importance of understanding the difference between cholesterol and lipoproteins, why environmental CO2 might not be the issue it is portrayed to be, why fiber is not an essential amino acid or is not essential in our diet, and more. Before we begin, I'd like to emphasize that this podcast is separate from my role as a family medicine resident at the University of Toronto at the Royal Victoria Hospital in Barrie, and I may cover topics that aren't fully aligned with the CPSO, our governing body of physicians here in Ontario. It is, however, part of my desire to bring awareness and information as it relates to improving health and other aspects of life at a zero cost to the general public. Hey Zoe, nice to meet you. It's nice to finally be able to sit down and have a conversation with you. I've been looking forward to it for quite some time.
Oh, thank you. That's very nice to say. Thank you for the invite. It was a really nice surprise to receive that.
I've heard lots of good things. The way I came across your content is I shadowed a doctor who has a medical nutrition practice focused on weight loss and reversing type 2 diabetes. And we were just kind of bonding over all the scientific things that we disagree with in the current space and what we agree with. And he brought up your website because you tackle a lot of the articles and break it down in a way that we understand the statistics. And I got a chance to see some of your blogs and watch a couple of your videos. And I really appreciate how you keep the information simple, straightforward, and easy to digest.
Thank you.
Why don't we start off with you sharing a little bit of who you are and how you kind of got to this point in your life, why you talk about diet and your research, and then we'll dive into a couple of questions.
Okay. Right, potted history. First interest in anything to do with food was when I was a teenager and my brother was a teenager and he was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. And that had a huge impact on the family because we were suddenly helping him inject, so he didn't have the same injection site. The family diet changed. The advice then wasn't too bad. It certainly wasn't the kind of plates and pyramids that we have nowadays. It was much more, you're going to need to eat whole foods. And we came from a background of sort of high teas, which was sandwiches, cakes, scones sort of in the afternoon after quite a big lunch, which was kind of, the Welsh way, the Northern England way. All of that had to change. Wind forward, I then ended up at Cambridge University and just became fascinated by the fact that there were a number of people around me with eating problems. It was sort of almost the birth of the eating disorder, I guess, in that period of time. and realizing that people did not want to be obese, and yet obesity was just going up and up and up. I then left Cambridge, started a great sort of blue chip career. I ended up working for Big Food, Mars. I ended up working for Big Pharma, SmithKline Beecham, or GlaxoSmithKline as it is now. So I've kind of seen those industries from the inside. Had a really great career in HR. I travelled the world, ended up as sort of executive vice president for human resources. And then 2009, got the opportunity to leave the corporate world and pursue my interest and my passion. And I'd kind of had this interest in diet and obesity in parallel with all the corporate work that I was doing. And I had actually written a book while I was in the corporate world in 2004, and it was called Why Do You Overeat When All You Want Is to Be Slim? And it was clearly trying to answer that question: physical reasons for overeating, emotional, mental reasons for overeating. Carried on with my corporate career, and then another couple of books came out in 2008, and that's when I thought, okay, I'm going to see if I can make my passion what I do. And clearly it's not as lucrative as being a executive vice president of human resources, but it's been really nice, really fun, and really enjoyed what we've done. So that's what I've been doing since. And in the last, how long? Since 2009, so that's 12, 13 years. Did a PhD in public health during that time, and then kind of got onto the speakers circuit, spoke at a lot of conferences, and generally have busted quite a few nutrition myths along the way. And then, as you very kindly said, I do this Monday Note. I've been doing this Monday Note now since 2010, where I take an academic article, and they now usually come from supporters. I don't have to go looking for them, so I get an email every day saying, hey, can you look at this one? So I just keep mixing them up so I don't get bored, the punters don't get bored. And today, for example, there was one saying, does salt cause metabolic syndrome? And of course the answer is no, but the paper kind of concluded that it did. So I took it apart, showed what was wrong with the paper, what they hadn't adjusted for, all the other cofactors that they hadn't taken into account, and that's kind of what I do. So that's me.
Wow, I appreciate that. You put in a lot of work, and I was kind of reading through your website, and you've been involved in about 53 papers since 2013, which is quite a bit, which is really, really neat, because to do all that work, to work with people, I think you've worked with Dave Feltman recently on a recent paper. You have to go through a lot of the research, and that's what I value about interviewing somebody like you that has a PhD, because you take the time, you're involved, you're in the trenches, getting to know the research. Whereas I'm a young doctor, but like doctors like me in my field, we just kind of turn to the guidelines and trust that everything is, very accurate, and we don't have too much time to get into the papers. And so it's nice that there's that option to be able to read your Monday kind of breakdown of certain articles to get a little bit of more knowledge and understanding of like, okay, what are different things that we should consider before taking an article and its results at face value.
Yeah, if I looked a little bit puzzled then, actually, just because it froze, the screen froze at my end, so hopefully that doesn't happen again. Hey, Dave, Dave Feldman, we've communicated. He's been over, he's stayed with me. He's interviewed me about cholesterol because that's his thing. We haven't actually collaborated on a paper, but we kind of will share ideas or help each other. He's definitely somebody each of us could go to and say, hey, have you done this? But yes, in the field, I've worked with people like Malcolm Kendrick, Ufi Ravenscoff, David Diamond, there's an organisation called the International Network of Cholesterol Skeptics, and they're a very sort of disparate bunch. They will have very heated discussions on what we think does cause heart disease, but the thing that unifies us is we don't think it's cholesterol. We think the cholesterol hypothesis is a massive oversimplification, and just not very helpful, to be honest, because it just puts people down the meds route, avoid saturated fat route. We can come on to how insane that is if that's somewhere you want to go. But it's just not that helpful. So yeah, lots of different collaborations. And then I guess most of the papers actually came from my PhD. I was probably quite fortunate in that respect that the PhD was in a few parts. So there was kind of a paper on this part and another paper on this part and background paper to that part, and then wrapping it all together. So it was quite a prolific PhD, shall I say, for papers that came from it, which was quite nice. And obviously the university is always very happy with that because they get points, and points mean money.
Yeah. So I want to give you kind of a scenario that I often find I see in the clinic. As a new family medicine resident, I'm responsible for a roster of 200 patients. And I see some of my colleagues' patients as well. And so I think having a scenario to kind of frame some of the questions that we kind of will answer throughout the podcast might be helpful, even for the listeners especially. So this is something that I often come across. I just want you to imagine, like, if you had someone in front of you that wanted to lose weight, but they're concerned about eating too much meat because they've been told it's carcinogenic, bad for the environment, bad for their heart, and their doctor told them that plant-based diet is better and more sustainable. That is... Unfortunately, I've seen that a little bit too often in even the small portion of patients that I've seen so far. I'm only 4 months in, and I often find myself trying to comfort people and be like, it's okay to eat red meat. Like, some patients will eat it once every 6 weeks.
Wow.
And when and I was like, it's okay, break it down to every 3 weeks, once a week. Like, it's not bad for you. And a couple of times I had a supervisor actually kind of caution me, say, hey, Thiago, I appreciate your passion for nutrition, but maybe you have to slow down a little bit on the red meat thing, because we know there's studies that show it's bad for the heart and bad for the environment. And I was like, okay, and she was very nice. She wasn't confrontational. She didn't want to debate, but just so I'm aware of the guidelines and just not to be kind of handing out steaks to everybody. So that's kind of like the frame that I approach some of these conversations now, having personal experience talking with patients. Kind of bird's eye view to frame so people know where you're coming from. Like, in your perspective, from your research, what do you think is an ideal diet for humans?
Okay. Just before I come on to that, because that's a great question. There's loads of evidence against heart disease and all the rest of it. There just isn't. So one of the things we can add to the show notes is if you go on my site and put in red meat, the evidence, I've actually got a post on that where I went to the last US dietary guidelines, because the US dietary guidelines kind of spill over into all of our countries, yours, mine, Australia, New Zealand. And I looked at the evidence that they looked through to try to come up with their guidelines. And they split it into different categories. So they'd look at, in fact, they didn't even look at red meat. They looked at animal proteins. They'd look at animal protein and heart disease, animal protein and different types of cancers, animal protein and diabetes. So I just went through their systematic review systematically. And in every single circumstance, they either hadn't studied red meat or they had found nothing. And these were association studies anyway. So these were not randomized controlled trials. So I would have said to your supervisor, thank you very much for your input. I would be thrilled to see all the randomised controlled trial evidence against red meat next time we have a meeting, because there is none. She would not be able to produce any. So it's just one of these myths that has come about that, cows are destroying the environment, red meat is going to kill you, red meat causes heart disease, all the rest of it. The evidence just isn't there. So back to your question. Where do I go at this from a top level? And I say this at conferences. I have 3 really, really simple principles when it comes to eating. And I find that it's difficult then for people to argue against you, because they are very sensible and they're just impossible to knock down. So number 1, eat real food. So I think if you sat down with your female supervisor or colleague or whatever and said, look, can we agree that people should be eating real food? They should not be eating processed food. They should not be eating in the food hall in the mall and all the rest of it. I'm sure you'd have a major area of agreement. You know, what is real food? It's food that comes from the ground and the environment around us. It's not made in a factory. It comes from a farm, not a factory. Great. So you agree on real food. Second principle, choose that real food for the nutrients it provides. So then you ask the question, why do we eat? Yeah, it's enjoyable, it's sociable, but we eat because there are certain nutrients without which we die. You know, let's not pull any punches. unless we get retinol, we are going to get eye disease. Unless we get vitamin D, we are going to get rickets or viruses, all kinds of disease or whatever. Each nutrient that we need, there's a reason for it. So what are the things that we need? So you look at the macronutrient level, and macronutrients, there are three. We know them as protein, carbohydrate, and fat. And then you look at the micronutrient level. So at the macronutrient level, what must we eat? There are essential proteins, amino acids that we must consume because the body doesn't make them. We must get them in our diet. There are essential fats. Again, they're essential because the body doesn't make them. We must get them in our diet. There are no essential carbohydrates. So immediately you're heading down the path that is going to be the winning path. And where do you find those essential proteins and those essential fats? Well, the essential proteins are the complete proteins. And the only food that provides complete protein comes from animals. I used to be a vegetarian, so I'm not coming at this because I'm Sean Baker's, sister or something, and I'm pushing the carnivore diet. It's just a nutritional fact. Complete protein comes from animal foods. The essential fats in the form that we need them come from animal foods. So that's DHA and EPA. It's not ALA, which is the form of the fatty acids that is found in plants. And the plant-based people will say, well, people can convert. Yes, some people can, not all people. And surely it's better for the body to have the food in the form that it needs it. So then you go on to micronutrients. So there's no debate. There are 13 vitamins, 4 fat-soluble vitamins, and then 9 water-soluble vitamins, the 8 B vitamins, and then you've got vitamin C, water-soluble. They also come in forms that the body wants. And in every circumstance, when there is a form that the body wants, it comes from animal foods. So retinol comes from animal foods, carotene comes from plant foods, D3 comes from animal foods and the sunshine, D2 comes from plant foods, B12 only comes from animal foods. You move on to the minerals, and of course the most absorbable form of zinc and iron is in animal foods. Invaluable sources of calcium are oily fish, dairy products, eggs. Again, you're back to your animal food. So principle 2, choose that real food for the nutrients it provides. If you follow that principle, you will eat meat, and red meat is more nutritious than white meat. You will eat fish, and oily fish is more nutritious than white fish. You will eat eggs, especially the yolks. You may as well throw away the white, not the other way around. And you'll eat full fat dairy products. Now, there are other foods that are useful. Sunflower seeds are useful. Green things are useful. Some legumes are pretty nutrient dense, but they will never beat an animal food. So if a plant-based person wants to have a nutrition fight with you and you pick an animal-based food, and I'll tell you straight away, the one to pick is liver. I don't like it, but it's the one that will win, and you will win the nutrient competition. So that's rule number 2, and it takes you down the animal, red meat, oily fish, full fat dairy route. There is no other conclusion that you can come to. The nutrients are not found in the plants. I'm sorry, but they're just not. And then rule number 3 is eat a maximum of 3 times a day. We have got to realise the orchestra that we set off in the body the minute we put something with a calorie in our mouth. And the minute there's a calorie, you've got a macronutrient. So you've got protein, fat or carbohydrate. You've got something, or alcohol, of course, you've got something that the body has to deal with. And if you could see what the body has to do in terms of getting sugar out of the glucose, out of the bloodstream, what it has to do to chop up essential fats, complete proteins, get the nutrients travels around the body, you would not do that 15 times a day, which is what some people are. They're just grazing the whole time. Just stop the grazing. We're not animals that should graze. Leave that to the cows. So that's my top level, and I like to think your colleague would struggle a little bit with that one.
Yeah, I appreciate that, because you keep it so simple. It's like first principles, like what do we need? What provides those nutrients? Stick to that. Like anything else is not really essential. It's, if you like the taste, sure. I think one of the biggest struggles that advocates for like a low carb diet, and everybody kind of in the circle that we listen to, talk to, is the frustration of the aim of the guidelines to do like a forced function, to force you to eat the plants, eat whatever they're selling, right? I think if there wasn't as much of that forceful nature behind certain papers or behind certain ways of communication, then probably wouldn't be as much of a pushback. But it's that extra force where people that we have to start sharing the proper information so patients are aware of, so that they can make the decisions on their own account.
Yeah. And question the motive. So who gains if we're told to eat plant food rather than animal food? There's really not much margin. You talk to a farmer like Peter Ballestad or so on, or Gareth Wyn-Jones over here in Wales, there's just so little margin in real quality meat, dairy, cheese, fish, really, really low margin. But take some cereal, try to get people to have cereal instead of eggs for breakfast, which is what the dietary guidelines do, and you can put it in a box, you can put a toy in it, you can do marketing, you can take basically 10 cents worth of product and sell it for $4. Great product.
Yeah. One thing that I want to kind of bring up here is one of the slides that you've created, which I found very helpful. I think I even brought it up to one of my patients. This one. Can you see it?
Yeah, I like that one. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you want to kind of run through this slide quickly?
Yeah. It's about helping me. When I came into this, I was never taught nutrition at school. I did maths and economics at Cambridge. I then went into human resources. So when I came into the food arena, I had to understand, what do you mean there's two forms of vitamin A and I'm not getting what I need? And then I realised why I'd had some eye trouble while I was eating a plant-based diet. So I have to kind of understand things for myself. So I get to the point where I say, okay, what do we eat? We eat macronutrients. What are those three macronutrients? Carbohydrate, fat and protein. So where do we find those foods and what are they? And can we put all the things that we actually eat into some kind of overall framework so it helps me to make sense of it? So then you start doing a bit of investigation. You say, oh, this is really interesting because there is actually only one pure carbohydrate on the planet, which is the blue bar over on the left-hand side, and that is sucrose, what we know as table sugar. Has no vitamins, no minerals, has nothing of any value whatsoever. It's just complete useless junk. No protein, no fat. So it's entirely on blue over on the left-hand side. Over on the right-hand side, you've got the 100% fats, and those would be things like olive oil, coconut oil, rapeseed oil, sunflower oil and so on. Not butter, interestingly, because butter has got some protein, so butter starts sort of moving in towards the centre. But then the next massive realisation that I made, and this was when I was trying to understand obesity, is that nature tends to provide, the real food around us, it comes in essentially carb proteins or fat proteins, because outside of those two extremes where you've got pure carbohydrate or pure fat, protein is in everything. And that's another really interesting finding. So people say, oh, you need to eat all these different things to get protein. No, there's protein in lettuce. There's protein in an apple. There's protein in bed. Yeah, there's loads of protein in white fish and chicken breast, but there's actually protein in everything. So as long as you start eating the right proteins, you're actually not going to struggle to get protein. But then you realise that nature kind of provides carb proteins, which is what vegans, plant-based people would eat, and that's your fruit, vegetables, grains, and what we call legumes, which is beans and pulses. And then nature provides fat proteins, which are the things that the vegans wouldn't eat, and that's your meat, fish, eggs and dairy. And that was another fascination for me, because there are only a couple of foods in nature where you've got carbohydrate, fat and protein all in good measure. And those are your nuts and seeds and avocados. But the really interesting one in among all of those is nuts, because how many people will tell you when you start eating nuts, you just can't stop. It would be a binge food for certain people in the real food world. You could overeat nuts quite easily. And my theory on that is you can overeat them quite easily because they are quite unique in nature. They are this fat-carb combination that nature just doesn't usually provide, but human beings find it completely irresistible. So I then say to people, okay, if I give you a carb protein, so I give you dry bread or dry crackers, and say how much can you eat, you won't be able to eat very much. So if I go over to a fat protein and say, right, there's a block of cheese, just keep going, you might be able to eat more cheese than you could the crackers, but you've got a limit. Then I say to you, right, you can have the cheese and the crackers together, or the cheese and the bread together. You've got no limit, because you're in that fat carb combo. And the fake food manufacturers, and again, this kind of ties in my background in HR, coming into the nutrition world. I've been around food science labs. I've seen the guinea pigs, and they're usually students. They're usually your age, and they line them up against these little hatches, and they put through a food, and then they say, right, score it for taste, palatability, aftertaste. What did you think of it? How long was it in your mouth? Was it creamy enough? Was it smooth enough? And then you give the feedback, you and 20 other people, and then they adapt the recipe, and then they give you, and they just go at it until it's Pringles or it's Dunkin' Donuts. It is completely irresistible. Once you start eating it, you just will not be able to stop, and that will be because it will be the perfect carb-fat combo that nature doesn't make, so you haven't evolved to be able to cope with it, and you will be able to overeat it like there's no tomorrow. So that is food to me. That is food in our environment. Don't worry about protein. Fats, by the way, are really not that nutritious. All these people saying, oh, olive oil is a wonder food, coconut oil is a wonder food. No, they're not. They've got no complete protein. They've got a couple of fat-soluble vitamins. Of course they have, because they're fats. They've got no minerals. They've got no water-soluble vitamins, because they're 100% fat. They're really not all that. Olive oil really isn't anything special. Don't go around thinking that's why Mediterranean people live longer. It's not why they live longer, it's the sunshine.
Yeah, and would you then, so just in regards to fats, would you lean towards like using tallow to cook?
Well, I would always go for natural fats that come from animals. So my hubby's the chef in our household. So if hubby's cooking a pork joint or a beef joint, he'll save the fat. And then it will tend to solidify. That's another interesting thing about fat that we might end up getting onto. People talk about certain foods as if they're full of saturated fat, or they're entirely saturated fat, or whatever. And that is another complete myth. So any food that contains fat, and you've now seen that you've got pure fats, you've got the animal foods, you've also actually got a trace of fat in most of the stuff on the left hand side, but it's just predominantly carb protein. That's another little fact about fat. But any food that has fat contains all three fats: saturated, monounsaturated and polyunsaturated. So when people say, oh, red meat is full of saturated fat, it's not even the major fat. Red meat is mostly water, then it's mostly protein. You'll probably have 7% fat in a sirloin steak. Of those 7 percentage points of fat, only 2 are going to be saturated. I've looked at this. I put it up on another slide in conferences. So this whole idea that you can avoid saturated fat and only eat monounsaturated fat or polyunsaturated fats as well is another complete and utter myth. There is not one single food on this planet that you could eat that is entirely one fat and not the other 2.
Yeah, I think when I listened to one of your lectures about that, I was surprised because I haven't looked into it. But it's good to know that there is saturated fat in a lot of foods, and it's not the primary one in red meat, because so many people are afraid of it. And I remember reading through it's like a burden of proof study. I'm not sure if you came across it in October 2022, looking at how saturated fat is not associated with increasing type 2 diabetes, stroke, atherosclerosis. Did you ever break down that study, or do you remember it?
I do. I can't remember if I did one. I know there was another one around the same time where the Global Burden of Disease team, and they're always trying to damn red meat, and they've done something where from their previous report to the current one, the damnation of red meat had just gone up by multiple factors. And then there's a guy that I know over in Belgium, Frederic Loire, and he and a team from Ireland had kind of taken that apart. So if someone else has done it, I kind of don't have to do it as well. There's so many papers. We need to sort of divide and split up. You know, if I see that Rob Wolf has done something, or Nina Teicholz or whatever, it's like, great, okay. And we email each other, you know, it's like, great, you've done that one, I'm going to do another one. But no, it's utterly insane, the idea that there is anything in any real natural food that is trying to harm us in any way. How would we have got here? You know, we've been eating animals since man first walked upright, Australopithecus lucy. How long ago was that? I don't know, 500,000 years or something. And you look at the cave paintings, you know, they're not boiling up legumes and making a lentil dal or something. You know, the cave paintings are man, and it is always man with spear, chasing animal. You know, they're telling us what they ate. And the animals have all the nutrients. So again, why would nature do that? Why would nature say, you've got to eat the red meat because you need the iron and the zinc and all the B vitamins and the essential fats and the complete proteins, but we chuck something in that's going to fur up your arteries at the same time, just to have a little bit of a sense of humour or something. And the other thing is, how does food even fur up your arteries? You know, you eat your food, right? You don't inject it into your bloodstream. So I eat my food, it goes down the esophagus, it starts going into the digestive system, it goes into the stomach, it goes into the lower intestine, it goes into lymphatic system, and it gets packaged out to take the nutrients around the body. When did any of that food jump out of my digestive system and leap its way into my arteries, to clog up my arteries? I mean, they've created this incredibly visual scam. I remember there was a public health video in the UK about 20 years ago, and they had somebody sticking fat, pure solidified lard, tallow, whatever, down the sink and saying it will block up your sink and it will block up your arteries in just the same way. And it's like, if I slice off my arm and start trying to shove it into my arteries, I imagine it probably would clog them up, but by that point I'm going to be dead anyway. How does it eat? I mean, the more you look at nutrition, the more mental it gets. And I don't know.
That's a good old school commercial, right? To scare people with that horrible visual. I think we covered a little bit of saturated fat, maybe even like why there's this demonization of meat. Obviously, like you said, you have to consider the intentions of big food, big pharma. Where's all the money coming from, and where's it going? I had a conversation with one of my supervisors about this. Very nice guy. He's one of our research leads, and so we're just having a conversation about triglycerides and HDL and LDL. Do you think, like from the studies, the issue is with just cholesterol in general? Is it LDL, or is it the fact that people just have low HDL? Because when we were having a discussion, he said, he doesn't agree that LDL seems to be the issue. It looks like if people have a low HDL, then they tend to have, worse outcomes.
Okay. Where do I start with this one? I do not personally see cholesterol as any issue whatsoever. Absolutely no issue whatsoever. So the body is making cholesterol. My body's making cholesterol right now. Your body's making cholesterol right now. We'll both probably make more cholesterol when we're asleep, because that's kind of what the body does. It does all the repair and maintenance then. It's making it because it is utterly life vital, and we would die without it. And people don't seem to realise that. So if by some miracle, let's say a statin completely removed all cholesterol from the body in just one tablet, we would be a puddle on the floor. There would be no cell left intact. There's no cell integrity. There's no cell structure. It is the essence of life. And the body has a pathway, the mevalonate pathway, by which it is making cholesterol. And there are other sort of byproducts of the pathway. So, for example, CoQ10 is further down the mevalonate pathway. And CoQ10 is also called sort of the body's energy spark plug, which is why when some people take statins, they end up feeling that their get up and go has got up and gone. They lose their energy. They also can lose their minds, because the brain hosts, or the brain hosts 25% of the cholesterol in the body, so they can find they lose their memory, they lose their mind. You can lose your muscle benefit. It can do real harm. And I kind of just, again, at a top level, I'm a really simple sort of let's get up into the helicopter and let's see what's going on here kind of place. Why would the body have a pathway to make an utterly life vital substance without which we would immediately die, and then it be a good idea to block that pathway? So starting point, I do not see cholesterol as a problem at all. I see the body is making cholesterol, the body is making the cholesterol that it needs to. Now, I did think maybe cholesterol is a marker. Maybe it's one of those things that it's telling us something. It doesn't necessarily mean that we should be lowering it. Kind of like I'm a bit curious about blood pressure as well. Blood pressure is a marker to me. It's a really useful marker. And then we just medicate. We don't try to work out why has this person got high blood pressure. Actually, there's an incredible normal distribution with blood pressure, as there is with cholesterol. And the normal distribution is normal because it is the normal distribution. So the normal distribution for cholesterol probably goes from 3 to 10. So somebody's going to have 10. But of course, the medical profession has decided that 5 is too high. And therefore, they just kind of want to shift the whole normal distribution. The same with blood pressure. The true normal blood pressure was 140/90. And then we put loads of people on blood pressure meds, and then suddenly you're being told you've got high blood pressure, it's 130/85 or whatever. So to me, there is no issue with cholesterol. And because there is no issue with cholesterol, the whole LDL, HDL thing, and this is going to be a bit of a mind shift for some people as well. If you stop talking to me about cholesterol and you start talking to me about HDL, LDL, chylomicrons, triglycerides, which are VLDL by another name, then we're not having a conversation about cholesterol anymore. We're having a conversation about lipoproteins. So are you now worried about lipoproteins, or are you still worried about cholesterol? Because if you're worried about cholesterol, I really don't think you need to be. And then when people start saying, oh, well, okay, I'm not worried about total cholesterol, but I'm worried about LDL cholesterol, but I think HDL cholesterol is really good. It's like they're the same substance. The chemical formula for cholesterol is C27H46O. And there is no good or bad version. Cholesterol is cholesterol is cholesterol. So in lipoproteins, we should probably quickly explain what lipoproteins are. So if I took my beaker of, put it in camera here, if I took my beaker of water here, and I got some olive oil and I drip some olive oil in the water, it won't mix because fat and water don't mix. That's the analogy for blood being water and the olive oil being lipids that need to travel around our bloodstream to reach the cells to do their vital work. So the body has come up with this fantastic system, and it says, okay, we're going to have these things called lipoproteins. I think of them as taxis. And these little taxis are going to go in the bloodstream to transport the vital cargo, and they're going to be water friendly on the outside for the blood, and they're going to be fat friendly on the inside for the lipids. And those lipoproteins are all carrying cholesterol, phospholipids, triglycerides and protein, all of them, just in different amounts. So the HDL is just a high density lipoprotein. It's just smaller than the LDL, which is a low density lipoprotein. So it's less tightly compressed. They have different amounts of cholesterol, different amounts of protein, triglycerides and all the rest of it, but they're both just taxis, and they're both taxis that carry cholesterol. So why, yeah, there you go, brilliant. And that's not a bad size dimension as well. So someone has done that to size. So the chylomicron, which is the one when you've eaten your lovely steak and you've got some saturated fat, monounsaturated fats, polyunsaturated fats, but more importantly, you've got the fat-soluble vitamins and nutrients. The chylomicron is the one in the lymphatic system. The body will package those nutrients out onto the chylomicrons, and they start going off around the body with the intent of dropping off that cargo to the cells that need it. Now, in a separate universe, the liver is making very low density lipoproteins. They're also called triglycerides, which gets a little bit confusing. So the liver's making the VLDL. Now, VLDL, as part of its process, kind of shrinks, keeping it simple, shrinks down to what we call intermediate density lipoproteins, IDL. They then shrink down and they become LDL. Now, some people then say, oh, so okay, so if your VLDL goes up, then your LDL will go up. Now, Dr. Malcolm Kendrick, who's studied this more than anyone else I know, he's devoted his life to looking at what really causes heart disease. He say, well, actually, that is not the case. The amount of VLDL that you have doesn't actually determine the amount of LDL you have. So that's another issue for another day. The idea that HDL, another taxi, is good, but all those taxis to the left are bad, is just nuts. It's back, we were only in Mad World, insane, this doesn't make sense. A couple of minutes ago, we're back in Mad World, insane, it doesn't make sense. They're just taxis. The body didn't design 4 bad taxis and 1 good taxi. They are all made by the exquisite functioning of the body for very, very good reason. So the VLDL is taking cargo away from the liver, and it shrinks down to become IDL and LDL. So kind of think of LDL as the taxi that's taking stuff to the cells, and then the HDL taxi will be picking any stuff not used up by the cell and taken it back to the liver. Now again, if cholesterol was so deadly, why would it take it back to the liver? It doesn't excrete it from the body, doesn't treat it like a waste product, takes it back to the liver where it can be recycled and then packaged out again. So I want to sort of scream at people sometimes. They talk about cholesterol and then they just slip into LDL and HDL seamlessly. It's like, whoa, right, we're not talking about cholesterol anymore. We're talking about lipoproteins. So what's your beef with lipoproteins? You know, tell me, what's your issue with lipoproteins? Because you are no longer in the diet, heart, fat, cholesterol hypothesis. You are now arguing with me on lipoproteins. And so you've got to forget cholesterol and you've got to tell me what your issue is with lipoproteins and why you think you know better than the body, because the body has designed all of that and that's how we've lived since we became humankind. And you're now trying to block that pathway. You're now trying to say that some of those are bad and some of those are good. And then you get people going into, and then you've got small, dense LDL, and then you've got large, fluffy LDL, and all that kind of thing. It's like, apart from the fact, I now really just want to find a wall and start banging my head against it. And like, could that be, you know, are we going to get to peak stupidity in this podcast at some point? Apart from that, you're back talking about lipoproteins. So, okay, but stop talking about cholesterol. People, they don't even understand what they're talking about. They, you know, when you sit down with your doctor and you have a blood test, I mean, I don't because it's just too stupid. I upset myself. But I did once for a company medical, and a doctor's saying to me, oh, your bad cholesterol is really low and your good cholesterol is really high. And I'm like, I'm the maths graduate from Cambridge and you're the medic. And that's just come out of your mouth. I mean, like, guys, this is nuts. This is nuts. Right, should we try and not say this is nuts too many more times during whatever time we've got left?
Well, I appreciate that explaining exactly what LDL. I certainly learned something from that, and I think we definitely don't in medical school because we have so much we learn and learn it so fast, and we just kind of have to take it, apply it, write the test, and kind of move on. Again, just kind of trusting the guidelines. I think not many doctors really sit down and think about the nuances of the conversations, and I think there's just so much nuance being missed throughout papers, podcasts, and just in general. Was there? We touched a little bit about. It's going to be kind of transitioning. The sustainability issue that people think there is with meat. Is there do you have something you could quickly share about maybe some numbers that people could kind of grasp and think about? I often hear, agriculture contributing to, 3 or 4% of like CO2 emissions. And I think that's such a big one that I hear doctors that I talk to as reasons for not eating animal-based foods. What are your thoughts about that?
Oh, again, where do I start on that one? I might upset some of your listeners here because I don't buy the whole CO2 is bad. In fact, the parallels between the diet heart hypothesis and the CO2 hypothesis are actually really similar. So we've demonized, in the nutrition world, we've demonized cholesterol, and cholesterol is utterly life vital. And in kind of the environment world, we've demonized CO2, and CO2 is also utterly life vital. We just die instantly without it. And interestingly, to grow plants in greenhouses, you pump a shed load of CO2 into the greenhouse. That's how they cultivate plants. So in the environment generally, and a lot of people, if you get into a green debate, they don't know these kind of numbers. So CO2 in the environment is about 400 parts per million. And it's generally then accepted that if mankind has any impact over that, it's probably only at about 12 parts per million. So you're into the most minute impact anyway. You can then look back over history and say we've had CO2 much higher, we've had CO2 much lower, way pre-industrialization. So it's really difficult to even see an association between industrialization, what mankind is doing, and CO2 being higher. There was also a paper that came out very recently which makes complete sense, which is if there is any relationship between CO2 and warming, it's far more likely that the warming precedes the rise in CO2. So again, you've got the greenhouse. If you've got the greenhouse and it moves from spring into summer and it starts getting really warm in the summer, the CO2 level in the greenhouse will rise more naturally. You won't have to pump quite so much CO2 in. So if there is a relationship, it could well be the other way around. So I'm really struggling with that one as well. I see that as another thing. If you look at, I'm always looking at motive. Who gains from demonising cholesterol? Who gains from the idea that if you're a religious person, God got it wrong? If you're not a religious person, that nature got it wrong? That the body should not have a mevalonate pathway. Who gains from blocking that mevalonate pathway? Well, clearly pharmaceutical companies do. Who gains from some of the environmental stuff that's gone on over the last years? Oh my goodness, well, Al Gore is right up at the top of the people who've gained from all of this, people who've invested in wind and solar, alternative energies, and of course it lends very nicely into the plant-based agenda. Now, I don't normally come at it from that side. I wouldn't normally even get into that debate because it is a little bit controversial. I would normally come at it in my usual style from the principle debate, which is, okay, let's look at what plant food contributes to the earth and let's look at what animal foods contribute to the earth. Because at the end of the day, there are two ways that we can continue to feed the population. We can feed the population in the way that we have done since time began, which is in fields, using soil and traditional farming. And yes, there's a lot more fertilizers than we've ever used, but we're still essentially grazing animals on land and tilling fields and barley and all the rest of it. So we're still largely doing that. Too many cow sheds and chickens cooped up in concrete boxes, but that's a separate issue. But then, of course, we've got this whole sort of factory production, and now they want to move the food supply into the factories. So we need to protect topsoil, and I'm members of organisations like the Soil Association, the Sustainable Food Trust, the Farming Association, Pasture Fed Livestock. I support a lot of organisations and farmers who are trying to preserve topsoil, because without topsoil, human beings have no ability to naturally feed themselves. So I live in Wales, I live in the countryside, I go for a walk every morning. On the days it rains, it's like a brown river flowing down the road, and it breaks my heart because I know what that is. And it's topsoil being washed off the top of the land, and it goes into the drains and it ends up in the sea, and it never comes back into the fields as topsoil. So that is topsoil being eroded, and when it's gone, it's gone. We used to have topsoil that was several feet thick. It's now inches thick, and in some places it's millimetres thick. Without that topsoil, we can't grow plants or we can't graze animals. So we actually need to be going back to what happened in the agricultural revolution, which was started in England. The 3-field system was the perfect system. So the farmer has groups of 3 fields, and in year 1, he'll have the grazing animals, and in year 2 he'll put the crops in because they're benefiting from the rich soil that the animals have churned up and cultivated. And then in year 3 he leaves the field fallow because it's got to recover, and then the animals can go back in and they get their food and they churn it up. And that's what we're supposed to be doing with nature. We don't do that anymore, particularly, dare I say, in North America. We still have animals grazing in the fields here in Wales and England. In North America, there are too many massive concrete farms where cows and sheep or whatever are in terrible, terrible conditions, and they're not giving back to the land. And that's where they calculate things like, oh, this is the methane that they're producing and all the rest of it. I mean, forget that. Just go back to the principle of how are animals supposed to be living. They are supposed to be part of our symbiotic relationship with nature, where they protect our soil that we need for our food. We eat them, we eat the food that they then also enable us to grow, and we live in this harmony. We're supposed to eat them, they're supposed to protect our topsoil for us. We've taken them away from that topsoil. That's going to be to our detriment. And if they want to, let's say the vegans won a global election overnight and said, right, there's no more animal production. They would just let all the pigs, cows, sheep, goats, chickens die out, presumably. They wouldn't kill them, they just let them die out. Once they're gone, they're gone. And then we have no ruminants, the animals that can actually graze the land and give back to the topsoil. So then the topsoil destruction accelerates. Then we have, they already think we've only got about 90 harvests left. Maybe then we've got 9 harvests left. Maybe then in 10 years, we could destroy the surface of the planet. And then you can't even grow the plant food in the fields. Not even fertilizers will then be able to help you. So what then happens? I can't remember the word for it, but if you Google greenhouses, growing food upside down in greenhouses, it's something Natrea or something like that. You can see images that are already starting to blight our landscape, and that's where they don't even bother trying to protect topsoil. They've just put a massive greenhouse on top of the land, and they're growing the food upside down in the greenhouses. Why upside down? Because they're not using soil. So they hang it from the ceiling, and then it grows down with gravity rather than growing up with the nourishment from the soil. Now, the minerals that we need, go back to what do we need to eat? The minerals come from the ground. So the minerals either get to us through the plants that the animals digest, and we then digest the animals, or they come to us directly from the plants that we eat that the animals helped us to eat. So veg are great. I'm not particularly low carb. Potatoes, things that naturally come from the ground, root vegetables, green things, nuts and seeds, great, minerals galore. But this whole demonisation of cattle, if you were in some James Bond movie, you'd say the end in mind would be that the fake food companies control the entire global food supply because we would lose our ability to grow food. That'd be a good plot.
Yeah, so it's really important, a really important point that you shared it there that I've been also trying to learn a little bit more about, is just trying to encourage more of that regenerative farming, which you do through building awareness. It's not easy. It's definitely more expensive. I think if you can't afford that, to just buy meat, which is fine. Doesn't have to be regenerative, but that's definitely the goal that we want to go towards. And I think it's really important just for those who might be a little bit anti-meat to understand that, like, we need the ruminants, we need them to stomp the ground, we need their manure to fertilize everything, right? And it's not, we can't just eliminate animals, we can't just eliminate cholesterol, like all these things were here before us. And it's part of our ecosystem. And so it's just learning how to manage the ecosystem, how to balance that soil, because with a healthy soil, we have healthy plants. With healthy plants, we have healthy animals, and therefore we can have healthy humans. And so I really appreciate you kind of going on for explaining for a couple minutes the importance of understanding each step of the way, because I don't think a lot of people really take the time to think about these processes. It's so easy to see something on social media, become an activist, or read some quick research article saying, oh, plants reverse diabetes, so plant-based foods is the way to go, without considering the other side. I had a supervisor come in with a 10-12 minute, because we just had our lectures about quality improvement projects, so we're starting one. And one of the things that this doctor presented on is how we need to eat like a real food diet, right? Eliminate the processed carbs. And from research, plants is real food, and they've seen that if you eat more plant-based, then you can, avoid or reverse type 2 diabetes. There's less heart disease, and it's healthier for the environment. And I remember listening to this, and my blood was boiling, and all my classmates know that my blood was boiling because they know I interviewed Anthony Chafee, a carnivore, and I talk to them all the time about meat and other things. And so it's just it was ironic. I had to sit through that, and I disagreed, but I agree that we have to eat real food. I just disagree about the elimination of meat.
Absolutely. And the whole sort of plants and diabetes, how does that make sense? Because diabetes is essentially the inability to handle glucose. You've got an issue with glucose. Either in a type 1, you're not making any insulin, so your body can't take the glucose out of the bloodstream, or in a type 2, I kind of think of type 2 diabetes as your body saying enough is enough. You've put in too much carbohydrate too often, Every time you do it, I'm only supposed to have 4 grams of glucose in my entire bloodstream, in the whole 5 litres of blood. And you ate an apple, and that was 20 grams that I had to deal with. And then you had and you just did it all day long, and you've done it for 20 years, and you don't have these 2 or 3 meals a day. 1 meal a day we probably used to have, or 1 meal every 2 or 3 days. You're just grazing the whole damn time. It's a M&M here and a piece of popcorn there. And I can't do it anymore. I can't keep taking the glucose out in the way that you want me to. It's just not happening anymore. You call it insulin resistance, you call it metabolic syndrome, you call it whatever you want. I call it the body saying enough is enough. Now go back to the coloured diagram that I use that you put up. You've got the plant-based foods, so the carb proteins, but the key word there is carbs. So veg, fruit, legumes and grains all deliver glucose into the bloodstream. So how do they help diabetes? Now, if you took somebody with a horrifically bad diet who's also got obesity, and they're eating junk food and Dunkin' Donuts and whatever all day long, and you took that person and put them on a plant-based diet and they lost quite a bit of weight, that would help their diabetes. But it wasn't the plants that did it. It was coming off the junk food and losing a great amount of weight. If you'd have put them on a real food, low carb diet with lots of nutrient dense meat, fish, eggs and dairy, they'd have done even better and probably be more able to stick to it because they'll get hungry on the plant-based diet.
Yeah, that's what I noticed too. I mean, I think a lot of people can agree, we can all agree, that it's the elimination of the processed carbs that is the primary benefit. But then I get patients that come back and they're seeing a dietitian and they're recommended to eat 5-6 times a day, small meals, plant-based and grains. I'm like I can't really say anything, at least at this stage as a resident. I just, they're being followed by a dietitian, so let them kind of do that. But if there's somebody else that isn't being followed, I'll let them know, eat something that's satiating, fat, meat. Your body craves protein. Once you hit your macros there, you're not going to be wanting to eat a lot. Eat carbs for last if you're going to eat any, because then you just won't be able to overeat as much. But yeah, that's something that I try to teach my patients. It's you don't need 5 or 6 meals. You just need the nutrients. You need the essentials.
The teaspoon thing then, that's the one that works for me in that position, because you can literally hold up a teaspoon with full of table sugar, and that's your 4 grams of sugar. Now, table sugar is glucose and fructose. So what you're saying is you've got 4 grams of glucose in the bloodstream, and then you say to them, okay, so you want to have your breakfast and then you want to have an apple mid-morning. So an apple, decent sized apple, is probably 20 grams of carbohydrate. And of that 20 grams of carbohydrate is pretty much entirely sugars. You've got some fructose and you've got some glucose. And the glucose is the bit that's going to go straight into the bloodstream. And then the fructose is the stuff that goes into non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. So when people say to me, which is best, glucose or fructose? I say, well, which do you want, type 2 diabetes or non-alcoholic fatty liver disease? It's your choice. They're both sugar. They're just sugar. Fruit is essentially sugar. I love fruit. Don't get me wrong. I could eat fruit all day long. It's like sweeties. But I don't kid myself that it's healthy. So if you can say to that patient, okay, so let's think about that apple. That's 20 grams of sugar. Let's say it's 10 grams of glucose. You only need 4 in your bloodstream at any one time. And you're not empty right now. You're at number 4. Unless you've got some hyperglycemia or diabetes thing going on, you're at the right number already. It's the body's job to make sure you stay at that number. So you put in 10 grams from that apple, you were at the right level. You've now gone 2.5 times higher than you were supposed to be. So immediately the body's got to wake up the pancreas, say, yo, insulin, sugar alert in the bloodstream, go and attach yourself to that glucose, take it out of the bloodstream, store it away in the storage room. And fine, if you use that up within a 24-hour period, it's not going to give you a weight problem. But if you don't use that up within 24 hours, the body turns it into fat, because the body's only got the capacity to store about 1,500 calories worth of carbohydrate in the body. That's only about 400 grams of carbohydrate. So when you get to your larder being full, your storage room for glucose, glycogen, stored form of glucose, carbohydrate. Body says, right, I'm now turning that into fat. And then you do the whole thing the next day. You have plants for breakfast, you have an apple mid-morning, you have your whole grain whatever for lunch, you have your healthy cereal bar in the afternoon, you have your low-fat pasta, whatever. You just carb all day long. And that's how you end up type 2 diabetic.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. I want to kind of remaining on the topic of meat, like protein, but just switching what we're looking at here. At the beginning, I remember, if you remember, I told you about the doctor that pointed me towards you. I just want to make sure, can you hear me right now? Yes, I can see you.
Yeah. You are pixelating a bit, and you do break up every now and again, but I've not lost the gist of what you're saying yet, so don't worry.
Okay, that's great. I asked him to send me a couple of questions because I know he appreciates your work so much. And so this is one of the questions. What are your thoughts on ideal protein intake and bioavailability in women at various ages when it comes to plant and animal protein? And should we be advocating for more protein in peri and postmenopausal women for bone and muscle health as they age?
Good question. There's a lot in there. Keep it simple. Animal protein above plant protein every time. I'm quite a sort of simple principle kind of person when it comes to this. So I'm not someone who ever advises people to count things. So I don't say work out your grams of protein or count this or count that. I just, again, come at it from principle. So I would say, if you eat protein in the way that it comes in food, I don't think you can go far wrong. So don't cut the skin off for chicken breasts. Skinless chicken breasts are too high in protein relative to the fat that you were supposed to eat with them. If you're having some pork, the pork chop comes with some fat. Don't go and eat everyone else's fat, particularly if you've got a weight problem. Don't go stupid, but eat the fat that naturally comes with your food. So if you've got a marbled ribeye or whatever, eat the fat that naturally comes with your ribeye. Don't go for low-fat dairy. You need the fat nutrients, and they're found in the high-fat dairy or whatever. So as long as you're not doing stupid protein things, which to me are white fish, not oily fish, chicken, skinless breasts, protein shakes, I just think are truly evil. Do not be doing those, young guys. It's probably the fastest way to liver problems, vitamin A depletion known to mankind. Just stop it. Eat real food, number one principle. And I think if you're following our guidelines of eat real food, choose the food for the nutrients it provides, and eat no more than 3 times a day. If you don't like breakfast, don't have it, but don't go and have 5 meals. You won't have to worry about it too much because nature has put the stuff out there for you. You're going to be okay. If you then stopped for a while, and particularly if you try to get some variety in your diet, and then you put what you eat on a weekly basis into an app, you should be really pleasantly surprised. Oh yeah, I am getting my zinc, I am getting my DHA and my EPA, I'm getting kind of what I need, and I am getting the protein that I need. I don't know, I wouldn't advise people as they age, not just women, yes, menopausal women, but just people generally as they age. Of course, we have to worry about sarcopenia, which is the loss of muscle mass, basically, muscle definition, muscle strength. I still don't think you should do anything daft, like still don't go and start having skinless chicken breasts and only white fish and starting protein shakes. Right. I'd say make sure you keep up getting the protein. So a lot of women, I think, when they get to menopausal age and they start worrying more about their weight, so then they might be tempted to go more low-fat dairy, for example. That seems to be an easy choice for people to make. Oh, if I didn't have proper milk in the morning, I could save loads of calories, kind of thing. The wrong thing to do. It's the fat that goes with the protein that you need for the satiety. So you need to keep those up. So I say more of the same thing, and you're not going to enter the menopause with a weight problem if you're following those principles, avoiding junk food, and also doing other healthy things like weight bearing, exercise, regular, mix it up. I'm a huge fan of CrossFit. I think in the earlier slide, it was very nice. You saw me presenting in a summer dress or whatever, and I was thinking, oh yeah, I had the arms then, and I've just got back from holiday. You probably see from the colour, it's like, yeah, the arms have been out. I got pretty good arms actually, and that's being normal, low to normal body weight. So everyone's got muscles. It's just a lot of people have got them covered. We've all got a six-pack, but just in a lot of people it's covered with body fat. So you have to get to a low enough body fat to unpack it. But then it's actually about using your muscles in a natural way. So lifting things and swimming and crawling around on the floor and doing yoga and all of that kind of good stuff.
Okay. So kind of just continue. It's really easy. Continue eating your meat. Don't avoid it. If you're not eating enough meat, then obviously add it, but don't trim away the fat. Eat it the way God kind of packaged it for you. And I would lean toward just eat animal meat because you absorb most of it. Actually, can you touch upon, do you know what the bioavailability of protein is in like plants and animal protein? Like, is there some web tool online that we can use to figure that out? And is that important?
Yeah, I mean, there probably is, but for me, it's more the complete protein. So again, there's an article on my website. I'm trying to think what you would put in to call it up. It might be the word chickpeas, or it might be animal versus plant protein. But I saw something on Medscape once, and it said, chickpeas are just as good as eggs or something. So I thought, okay, that's going to be my Monday note, because that is just complete nonsense. I went through all the amino acids in chickpeas and comparing them with eggs. And of course, they're incomparable, because going back to what we have to eat, what is an essential nutrient? Essential in nutrition means something we must eat. The body doesn't make it. So there are 9 essential amino acids. And not only are they found more in animal protein, they're found in the right proportions in animal protein. So I think when I go through that exercise with the chickpeas and the eggs, yeah, they've got those essential amino acids, but they don't have the right amount and they don't have it in the right ratio. So you end up, and I forget which one it is, I think lysine is one of them, or methy or whatever, you just don't quite get enough. And so you say, oh, well, you can just eat more so you can get more, but then you're in the wrong balance, because then you were getting too many of the other things. Remember, I was veggie for 20 years, so I am not coming at this from a... I don't actually like eating meat. I don't tell people that very often. I am a natural vegetarian. If what we eat had no impact on weight or health whatsoever, I would eat crap all day long. I would have fruit for breakfast. I love fruit. It's so sweet. I would have chocolates. I would have croissants. I would have ice cream. Again, it would have to be, it has no impact. So it wouldn't make you feel rubbish. It wouldn't make you fat. It wouldn't give you diabetes. It had no impact whatsoever. I would be quite happy eating crap all day long. I know I feel better now eating real food, because I know that food has a massive impact on how you feel physically, mentally, emotionally, energy wise, and all the rest of it. But if someone gave me an honest choice and said it has no impact on anything, do you want a mushroom risotto or do you want a steak? I would actually choose the mushroom risotto, and that might surprise people.
Yeah, for sure. I'm definitely, I was born in Brazil, grew up eating a lot of meat. And so I'd probably be just a carnivore. If it was more affordable. Oh, yeah?
Yeah. My hubby's definitely a carnivore. I mean, if he's just naturally keto, he gets up, he has bacon and eggs. For lunch, he'll have fish or eggs, dinner, steak, and then it's kind of, there's some green things on the side, but you kind of get the impression that it's only because he grew them in the garden. If he hadn't done that, he'd be like, yeah, who needs those? I got meat and then I got cheese for pudding. What else do I need?
I'm very much the same.
I'm definitely, hey, we're all different, but what we need is the same. We're different in what we like, but what we need, we're the same.
So kind of the way I try to structure the interview is kind of dealing with all the meat topics, and I think we covered quite a bit. One that we didn't really get to is maybe if you could briefly, even like just a minute, bird's eye view. I know it can be challenging. Is your thoughts on like processed meat versus unprocessed? It seems like the research is a little mixed. Like, we should avoid unprocessed meat because it can increase risks of certain cancers. But then then there's other research that says actually the risk is really small and it doesn't really change too much. Like, have you had time to dive into kind of like the real meat versus processed meat?
Yeah, and I think it again comes back to what is natural. So I'm from Europe, and if you look at processed meat in Europe, so if you go into a delicatessen in France or the Mediterranean, particularly France, Spain, Italy, Greece, going into a delicatessen, Italy particularly, well, actually France too, the meat counter is meters long. And they've got salamis and they've got dry cured this, that, and the other, where they've basically preserved meat. Because remember, we would catch the animal and we couldn't eat it all on, we did in the beginning. We had no means of preserving meat. But as soon as we learned how to preserve meat, either by salting it or hanging it out to dry, we were then able to sort of pace out the killing. So our foraging, it just became a lot more useful to us. It could sustain us over a much longer period of time. So to me, that is completely and utterly natural and completely and utterly healthy. Where processed meat starts going wrong, and I've actually heard Anthony say this as well, actually, I thought this was really amusing. He's worked it out too. The meat is not the issue, because we know that there's no evidence whatsoever against red meat. So if you then just dry it or salt it, there's no issue with salt either. You've still stayed within that. We know there's nothing wrong with it. When you start adding other stuff to it, but then it's the other stuff. So you will quite often find sugars in processed meat. You'll find maltodextrin, you'll find wheat, you'll find rusk, you'll find fillers, other preservatives that might then make it not so healthy. I still don't think it's a problem. I mean, again, I've looked at the complete evidence on the USDA website when the International Association for Research into Cancer published their famous report. Those are the kind of reports that I do go after. And I remember at the time going through it, and it's like, is it this cancer? No. Is it that cancer? No. Is it that cancer? You come down to, there might be an association with bowel cancer. And there's a particular, I'll try and find it for you if you do the show notes. There's a particular post when I dissected it. What are you talking about here? They'll say, there's a 25% risk difference. And of course, a 25% risk difference might still be the difference between 1 in 10,000 and 1.25 in 10,000. So who cares? But it's also, I think it was on, you had to eat, it was like 4 grams difference over a period of time. It was absolutely minute, the difference that it would make to health anyway. And yet they go and trumpet these big headlines from the rooftops or whatever. It's like, guys, it's just not an issue. When you actually get down to the absolute risk and how much you would have to eat to generate that absolute risk, it's like, guys, you're way more risky getting in a car or crossing the road or, I don't know, not getting on an aeroplane. That's pretty safe. Driving a car is the riskiest thing we ever do.
It's true.
If you're driving a car without due attention and you're worried about processed meat, you've not done your risk analysis the right way around.
Yeah. Moving on to more focusing on plants, and you have like one lecture just on, I think, fiber, and you've broken it down in some blogs as well, or some of your articles there. And I had a conversation. So I did my general surgery rotation in September, and talking to general surgeons, they're really big on fiber because they see a lot of bowel GI issues and find a lot of importance in it. And I'm trying to understand the importance of it. So kind of overview, I'm going to try and guess what your kind of take on it is, and then you can clarify. Okay. It seems like fiber doesn't have a nutritional value, but it may be beneficial in certain GI diseases, primarily soluble fiber, and other things like prevention of hemorrhoids and things, which is not a nice disease, but it's something that's so common in general surgery. So it's what came to mind. Does that seem kind of accurate?
You should have stopped at it's got no nutrients in it, and then you'd be 100% accurate. So a quick lesson on carbohydrates, see if I can remember it from a presentation I gave 3 years ago. So carbohydrates 101, you've got your monosaccharides, mono meaning one, saccharide meaning sugar. So all carbohydrates are essentially sugar. So your monosaccharides are glucose, fructose and galactose. Your single sugars. Then you've got your disaccharides. So let's just take one that people are familiar with. So sucrose is a disaccharide, and sucrose is one molecule of glucose and one molecule of fructose. So those single sugars get sort of formed together. So I think lactose disaccharide is one molecule of galactose and one molecule of glucose. You then come up to many sugars, polysaccharides, and you have digestible polysaccharides and you have indigestible polysaccharides. Fibre is an indigestible polysaccharide. So it is many sugars that we can't digest. Now, does that sound good to you? There you go, brilliant. So yeah, lactose, I got that right. So lactose is glucose, galactose, maltose. We don't hear about maltose very much. 2 molecules of glucose. And then the next thing in that presentation would have the polysaccharides. There you go. So you've got the digestible ones, and the digestible form of many sugars in humans is how we store carbohydrate. We touched on this earlier, that's glycogen. And the plant storage form of many sugars is starch. Now, if you then move to the next slide, you've then got the indigestible polysaccharides. And the indigestible polysaccharides are either soluble, and soluble are things that you can see would swell in water. So, for example, if you took, what swells in water? Porridge oats. So you could take porridge oats and you pour water on them and then they swell. So that's soluble many sugars, soluble fibre. Insoluble fibre, if you put, for example, kidney beans in a bowl of water and didn't heat them in any way, nothing happens to them. They just stay as hard kidney beans. They don't sort of swell or do anything at all. So fibre is basically a waste product. The body cannot digest it. So my first question is then, in every other field of life, a waste product is not a good thing. Waste is bad, yeah? Waste is rubbish. Waste is discard. Waste is get rid of. How come in the human body suddenly waste is this magical thing that we should all be eating 30 grams of a day? How does that add up? If you look at the whole of that presentation, you'll realise that a lot of this came from John Harvey Kellogg, Sylvester Graham, so the original cereal manufacturers back in the late 1800s. And of course those guys were setting up massive cereal companies. So it's in there, Sylvester Graham, there you go, John Harvey Kellogg, 1852, 1943. They wanted people to consume their cereal-based products. So they were the ones that started this whole fibre is good. And the reason they said fibre is good, they were both pretty religious guys, and they said that basically fibre would stop men masturbating. So it would stop sexual urges in men, and that's why they said that fibre was a good thing. So, you know, you've probably got some young male followers at the moment who now should be ditching the fibre, because if it's going to affect your libido, if they were right, and I don't know if they were right, then who needs the fibre? But it's a waste product that the body can't digest it. So how is it good for us? How is it doing anything other than abrasing the digestive tract as it goes down? Now, I would put it to those gastroenterologists, maybe the fact that you're seeing so many people with bowel disease and bowel cancer and hemorrhoids and all the rest of it is because people are trying to eat this 30 grams of stuff that they can't even digest. And then the body has got to get rid of it every day. So there's a great study, and I don't know if it's in that presentation. I only had half an hour in that one at Low Carb Denver. I did another version in London that year. And I did get onto this study at the end, and there's a great study that was done over in the Far East. It would be at about, it would be after sort of 20 minutes if I did get to it, but I think it's in the London one. And of course, there's no RCT evidence whatsoever that fibre is good for us. There was a study done over in the Far East where they took, I think it was 67 people with the most horrific bowel disease. So these poor people had the worst bowel symptoms that you can think of: diarrhea, constipation, bloating, abdominal pain, pain to the point that we're not talking discomfort, we're talking debilitating pain, can't go to work kind of pain. And the study was, we're going to take you off all fibre, and we've done the questionnaire so we know the level of your symptoms, and we're going to take you off all fibre, and then we're going to ask you to rate your symptoms again. And every single issue disappeared. Every single gastrointestinal issue disappeared. So then the study was basically to then say to the participants, do you want to go back to fibre? And of course, most didn't. And I would suggest that those that did would be those that like food that contains fibre. So that would be people who like fruit, or people who they were just in a routine with their lifestyle and they would find it too difficult to change out of that. But I bet they would have gone back to the fibre, had the problem, and then finally come off it. So I was at Cambridge with a guy who went on to become one of the top gastroenterologists in the UK, and I met up with him at a reunion a few years ago, and I was just getting into all of this stuff. So I said, oh, go on, tell me, what do you do? Where's your position on fibre? And he said, the minute someone walks through the door, I take them off fibre. And I went, yes, thank you.
Really?
Yeah,
Wow.
he got it.
Okay.
He got it. Cambridge graduate, and he got it. He'd seen too many people coming in, and he'd send them off to a dietitian in the early days, and the dietitian would say, oh, you need more fibre. It's like, actually, no, you need zero fibre. You need to go on pretty much a carnivore diet.
Yeah.
And if you if you have carbs, have non-fibrous carbs. So what my friend would say is, if you know, let's say he's talking to a patient, an Asian patient, for whom rice is really important in the diet, and they've come over from Asia and they've met British dietitians who are telling them to have brown rice because it's got more fibre. My friend was saying, no, white rice. Go for your risotto rice. Go for your no whole grain rice, white rice, no fibre. Ditto, if you're going to have pasta isn't great for the bowel anyway. Wheat isn't great. No whole wheat pasta. White, if you're having bread, white bread. Take the fibre out of your diet.
I appreciate that. And I find myself caught in the middle, obviously. Like, I love listening to this, hearing this kind of information. One, because I just don't like fiber. But two, but like the reason I'm caught is because I agree with this. I think it plays out in the real world when people actually apply it. But as a upcoming family doctor too, I have to uphold the standard of care, or at least give the patient the option. And so my goal is to become educated on both sides of the coin, and to be able to present to the patient like, hey, listen, like, if you've tried, you've seen the dietitian, maybe it's not working, it's a couple months in or a year in, how about we try this different approach? And at least I'll have that knowledge to guide them through that approach. And so I think at this stage of my training, that's the least of what I can do, is just provide two sides and give that patient that choice, which is always what a doctor should do. And so even on the statin front for cholesterol, I want to start kind of creating a spiel where I incorporate the science, the relative risk reduction, the absolute risk reduction, and being like, hey, you know, you can make your choice. I'll support you either way. And we can look at dietary approaches as well. And so the reason why I brought this up, aside from you having a lot of experience, like knowledge about this and having a lecture, is because I had a long conversation with the general surgeon, and she was very much like brown rice, pro fiber, low meat, low fat. And I'm like, no, I mean, she's really nice. We had a great conversation. But I was like, okay, I have to talk to Zoe about this. I think,
here's a really fun thing to do. When you meet people like that, this is really fun. Ask them questions. It's not for you to defend your position. They're the ones giving out the dietary guidelines. It's for them to defend their position. So Gary Fettke, Dr. Gary Fettke in Australia, one of his favourite questions when he's putting his patients on low-carb diets because he doesn't want to amputate their limbs, and when he gets fellow surgeons saying, oh, aren't you worried about cholesterol? He says to them, what's cholesterol? And they can't answer the question. So the next person who says to me, oh, you know, you should be eating loads of fibre, say, what's fibre? You know, see if your colleague can explain it as monosaccharides, disaccharides, polysaccharides, digestible polysaccharides, indigestible, but what we just went through, soluble, insoluble. and essentially come to the conclusion that it's multiple sugar that we can't digest. And then when they say those words coming out of their mouth, they start thinking, yeah, many sugars that you can't digest. You have to get people to start questioning their own paradigm system. So when Gary Fettke says, what's cholesterol? Most of his colleagues can't answer it. So he'd say, well, if you had some in your hand, what would it look like? The answer is it would look like a vanilla candle had melted in your hand. It's a sort of pale colour and it would look quite waxy. It's the stuff of life. But if you can't... This stuff, as you say, you just get taught it at med school. It becomes so much part of the narrative. I see people present in the field that I'm at and they're talking, and I know they've worked out a lot of this stuff, and I see them talking about large, fluffy LDL and small, dense LDL and all the rest of it, and I'm just sat there and I don't know whether to laugh or cry. It's like, guys, you've worked this out. What are you... Like, the implication is that the small, dense LDL can penetrate the arterial wall and the large, fluffy stuff can't. Seriously? You honestly think that the endothelial wall allows anything to penetrate it? We'd be toast if it did that. Why would we need LDL receptors if LDL could just be trundling along in the bloodstream and then like, oh, I'll just slip in through that little gap in the arterial wall there? Why? Why would it do that? Oh, because I want to kill the person. I'll just start furring up the artery. I mean, it just doesn't make sense.
So we talked about the fiber. We've talked a lot, and I just want to cover a couple more questions so I don't hold you here too long.
Well, aren't we?
Yeah,
it's dark. we
got to cover all of them.
We started off in the daylight, and now it's dark.
Yeah. The other question, another topic that people really care about nowadays is seed oils. They've become part of the modern diet. It's in everything that we eat, pretty much, at least the processed foods. What concerns do you have about their impact on health and why? I know I've seen there's some doctors, PhD doctors, that will kind of do a review of the papers and say, vegetable oils actually show cardiac benefit and they're not all that bad. I'm not sure if there's a difference if it's like fried versus just cold oils. What do you have to say for that?
So there are, again, I don't do something if someone else has already done it. I don't need to.
Okay.
I think some forerunners in this field, Nina Teicholz in Big Fat Surprise, does some great stuff on vegetable oils. David Gillespie written a book called Toxic Oil. And someone I've seen more recently is Chris Knobbe, I think Knobbe. Saw him present at a conference in May. He's at Low Carb in Australia at the moment. He presents the case that basically pretty much all the ills that have befallen humankind over the last few decades or whatever are all down to vegetable oils. And I don't think there's a single answer for all of this. I think it's a lot of things that have come together. People are not eating vegetable oils on their own. They're eating vegetable oils, as you said, in processed food. So for me, the problem is processed food. They're not a natural food. So if you go back to that eat real food, extracting oil from seeds is not actually a natural thing to do. I would argue that's a food, well, it is, it's a food process. And you've ended up, therefore, with a processed food, which is not a great thing. So sunflower seeds are very good, particularly for vitamin E, really good for vitamin E. I mean, leading, best food for vitamin E whatsoever. But not sunflower oil. Why would you want sunflower oil kind of thing? So if you're going to cook, then cook food in its natural fat. So meat you can cook in its own fat, and then it provides some fat which you can use for cooking things that don't provide their own natural fat. If you're going to cook vegetables, some people don't mind them in butter. Some people find that's too overpowering a taste. I'm in that group. That's kind of bubble and squeak to me. That's too overpowering. So then stir fry in olive oil or something like that. But you should not be using the heavily polyunsaturated fat oils, which is the sunflower oil, rapeseed oil, canola oil and all that kind of thing. No, not in cooking, not adding to food in any way, not as salad dressing. And definitely you should be avoiding processed foods anyway. So if you eat processed food, you're going to consume a lot of these cheap, overheated, potentially carcinogenic vegetable oils. But then you shouldn't be eating processed food in the first place. It's not just that part of the processed food that's going to harm you.
Yeah, what I usually tell my patients is if you can kill the animal or pull the vegetable or fruit from the ground or the trees, eat it. But if you can't do any of that, if you can't go hunting for it, then don't eat it. I think that kind of keeps it nice and simple. And I agree with that. I wanted to pull up, I'm going to share with you, I don't know how I came across this. I was preparing for this yesterday, and apparently the World Health Organization updated their guidelines on defining healthy diets, and just wanted to share with you. Maybe you'll be frustrated. Carbohydrate intake should comprise 40 to 70% of total calorie intake. And then they talk about saturated fat intake should be reduced to 10% or less, which I think has been pretty similar to what they recommended before. Yeah. And fat intake should comprise 30 or less. And then if you look at the healthy plate, you see vegetables, fruits, whole grains, so carbs, with fiber, and healthy protein, which they'd probably say, nuts, seeds, legumes, all that primarily.
Yeah.
The other thing I wanted to share with you, let's see if I actually got this message from my supervisor today in our kind of resident chat group, that they recently updated a simplified lipid guideline, which maybe I'll send to you to break down on your for Mondays. Let me see if I can. There. Can you see that at all?
It's really. I'm on my husband's massive Mac screen or whatever. Oh, is this your sort of when you should be taking statins or something? 10%.
Yeah, so they talk about statins, and it's long. Maybe I can send it to you if you want to look at it. But what frustrated me was that they still include a relative risk reduction when recommending the statins, right? And I know from your breakdowns and other doctors' breakdowns of this is that, and I hear me out, anybody listening or any supervisors listening to this podcast, because I know they do listen. Always consult your doctor, before discontinue a medication and starting one. But I think it's important for everybody to know the difference between the absolute risk reduction and then the relative risk reduction. And here they just quote the one, and it could be a change of 0.1% absolute risk reduction. So I just wanted to share that with you. Maybe a little bit of frustrations.
My favourite website on that one is something called thennt.com, the number needed to treat.com, and it's an independent group. And if you go on there, and for example, if you put in statins for someone who's not had previous heart disease, and it's an independent group that have gone through the literature, and they put it, because the number needed to treat is giving it to you in absolute risk terms, which is how you need to take it in. So what it will say is, if you haven't had heart disease before, and I'm picking these numbers from memory, so don't hold me to them, but they're not going to be far off. Not had heart disease before, take a statin for 5 years. No lives will be saved. No lives are going to be saved anyway. We're all going to die, but no lives will be saved in that period. I think it's something like you might have a 1 in 154 likelihood of avoiding an event, and an event can be angina. It's certainly nothing fatal anyway. But then they also look at the number needed to harm being on a statin for 5 years. And I think it's 1 in 50 likelihood of developing type 2 diabetes, and a 1 in, I better get this one right, I think it's a 1 in 10, might be a 1 in 20, but it's high. I think it's 1 in 10 of muscle damage, because of course, as we were saying with the mevalonate pathway, that's going to your mind, memory, muscles, mojo, and it will have an impact on that. Now, if patients are presented with that website, I've got cardiologist friends who've done this and said, okay, if you take a statin for the next 5 years, and a lot of people don't like taking meds, certainly not on a daily basis anyway, these are your likelihoods. They shrug their shoulders and they say, oh, I don't think I'll bother. I don't really fancy type 2 diabetes, and I certainly don't fancy muscle damage. I quite like the idea of not having that one event, but they weigh it up and actually say, do you know what, I don't think I'll bother. And that's the way to present information to people. So on that bowel cancer thing that we were talking about earlier, I think the numbers really were something like you've got a 1 in 10,000 risk, and if you had, you know, half a pack of bacon every day, you've got a 1.0 something in 10,000 risk. So it's like you've got a 1 in 14 million chance of winning the lottery. If you buy another ticket, you've got 2 chances in 14 million. You've still got 13,999,000 chances of not winning the lottery. You are still not going to win the lottery, or you're no more likely to win the lottery than you were with 1 ticket and 14 million. But the relative risk would be you've just doubled your chance of winning the lottery. Now, most people double the chance of winning the lottery, I'll take that, but you've still got a 1 in 14 million chance of doing it. Now, back to that other slide that you presented on the diet, that was why I did my PhD. So those are the dietary guidelines. Have no more than 30% of your diet in the form of fat. Okay, just a real quick thing here. Imagine a sort of a circle. Remember, there's only 3 things that we eat, 3 macronutrients, 3 things with calories: carbohydrate, fat and protein. Remember that protein is in virtually everything. The fact that protein is in virtually everything means that the global intake of protein is remarkably constant. So even though you're carnivore, and even though I'm not, I would wager that our protein intake is probably around 15 to 20% of our diet. And in most people, it's around 15%. So when they set that guideline that said you should have no more than 30% of your diet in the form of total fat, can you see what they automatically did to carbohydrate? You've got 15% protein, 30% fat, 55% has to be carbohydrate. They didn't test that. They didn't do an RCT on that. They don't even know that that's safe, let alone do they know that it's healthy. It's just the inevitable consequence of having set a restriction on fat. So my PhD, which is also on my website, my PhD basically said, right, why did they set those dietary fat guidelines? 30% total fat, 10% saturated fat. Why did they set those? And they set those in the name of heart disease. So that was my PhD. So the PhD said, right, I'm going to go back to when they set the dietary guidelines, which was 1977, 1980 in the US, 1983 in the UK, and I'm going to pretend I'm the committee at the time, and I'm going to look at all the RCT evidence, and I'm going to look at all the epidemiological evidence, and I'm going to see, would it have told me to introduce those 2 guidelines? Spoiler alert, 0 evidence. I did not expect that. I mean, you don't go into your PhD with a preconceived idea. If you do, you're not doing research. You're wasting your time. But if someone had stopped me and said, what do you think you'll find? Yeah, that's the great pie chart slide. What do you think you'll find? I would have said, I think I'll find evidence for those dietary guidelines being introduced, but maybe they didn't factor in the harm that they would do. Maybe they didn't realise all that carbohydrate was going to fuel obesity and diabetes. As it turned out, there was no evidence for why they introduced those dietary fat guidelines in the first place. Not RCT, not epidemiological. So the second part of my PhD was, okay, that was then. I'm doing my PhD in 2015. Let's bring it up to date. Let's look at all the evidence that's available now, all the RCT evidence, all the epidemiological evidence when they either tried to reduce fat or swapped out saturated fat, swapped in more unsaturated fat. No evidence whatsoever. There is just no evidence for this. And the consequences, I think, have been catastrophic, because I do think that inevitable carbohydrate increase, and then that quote there, increased carbohydrate consumption to account for 55 to 60% of calorie intake, that was kind of, if you haven't worked out the consequence of that 30% fat, we're going to spell it out for you. You've got to be having that kind of proportion of your diet, or that thing you showed me earlier, 40 to 70% of your diet in the form of the one macronutrient that we don't even need.
Yeah.
We need fat, we need protein.
One quote, which I think you quoted somebody else in one of your lectures, was, humans are the only species smart enough to create their own food and stupid enough to eat it. And I love that.
Yeah, that's usually my final slide, actually, when it's been stupid all the way through the presentation. It's like, and then there's the stupid thought at the end. And most people then get that, and they're like, yeah, we do make our own food, don't we? And we don't do a very good job of it. Nature has done a way better job, red meat
they remember it.
Cheerios. I think the farmer won.
So as we wrap up, we've been here for an hour and a half, which I really appreciate your time. One question that I like to ask every guest on the show is, what are 3 traits of someone who is unstoppable?
So I go back to my HR days for this, actually, because when I was HR director, Mars, the candy company, is actually one of the best companies in the world to work for. I can't say a bad word about Mars. I now don't think the products are great. They make fake food for pets and they make fake food for humans. I don't think the products are great, but the company is just great. We actually had 4, if I'm allowed 4, but there were... Universally, there were 4 criteria at Mars that you would recruit, and you would recruit a CEO to have these criteria, and you would recruit a receptionist or somebody working on the production line to have these criteria. They might need them in different ways and in different amounts, but these were the important criteria. So number 1 was what we called at Mars achievement motivation, which is the drive to achieve something. If you don't have the drive to achieve something, you might as well not be here. It doesn't matter what that motivation, you might want to be a painter or whatever, it doesn't matter, but you've got to have a drive to achieve something, otherwise you're really not maximising your time on this earth. Second one then was critical thinking. You've got to be able to evaluate things around you, evaluate new information that comes in, evaluate crises, evaluate what's good, what's not so good, what's safe, what's not so safe. Again, different level for different people in the organisation, but you've got to be able to critically evaluate, and that means doing it on your own, not doing what you're told. If 900 people in the factory are doing one thing and you're the one who probably critically evaluates something, you might come up with a new process that saves Mars £100 million over the next year. They wanted that challenge, that critical thinking. Third one was then judgment. If you don't have good judgment, if you can't weigh up that situation, if you can't see the consequences of your critical thinking, what might happen, if you can't be fair and decent and just to people around you, if you're not a good judge of character, good judge of situation, good judge of priorities, Mars is not interested. And then the final one for Mars was influencing skills, which was their... people skills were kind of a given at Mars, but influencing skills, if you've got all of those, so you've got the drive to do something, you're the great thinker that's going to come up with this brilliant idea, you've weighed everything up and you realise it really is truly brilliant, and you can't then take anyone with you. There was no point having that brilliant idea. So you've then got to be able to influence other people, to take them with you. And if there's anyone in HR who's now watching this, they'll now evaluate me throughout this last hour and a half against those criteria, because I wouldn't have worked for Mars if at the level I was working at Mars I didn't have some of those. So I am aware that, for example, on influencing, I've had, and you'll have this as well because you're passionate about your diet, you'll have friends that say to you, whoa, you're really you're really quite you're persuasive, that's a good thing, but whoa, almost you're a little bit heavy on this because I'm still eating my plants, I'm still vegetarian, I'm kind of not with you yet. But they do at least say, I understand what you're saying. And actually in this respect, I'm not trying to change anyone. I'll tell you a little really quick anecdote. When I was doing all the HR stuff and I ended up on the board of the National Health Service in Wales and I ended up on the board of a university, and I've been to loads of these black tie dinners, and of course you sat down at the dinner and you've got 2 complete strangers on either side, so the first thing you say to each other is, what do you do, who are you, hello, introduce yourself or whatever. And then when I wasn't doing the HR, let's say I didn't want to do HR that evening, and I'd be like, okay, I write books or something, just to have a different kind of conversation. Or you say you're interested in diet and health. Almost all the time they would say, oh, you'll be watching what I eat. And my reply used to be, I don't care what you eat, I care that you know what you should eat. And that's why I do what I do, and that's why Nina Teicholz does what she does. She is actually trying to change the dietary guidelines. I'm not. I'm trying to just say to anyone who wants to listen, anyone who wants to take care of their own health, I'm going to give you a different perspective. And you're going to get 99% of the message on narrative. You're going to be told, eat low fat, avoid meat, it's bad for the environment, bad for you, fur up your arteries, cholesterol is bad, take your statins, fibre is great, saturated fat will kill you. You're going to get that from 99% of the world. So I'm just a little voice in the other ear that happens to have looked at this. I like to think pretty objectively because I've got no skin in the game. I don't make any money out of, I could have made way more money selling a book that said, count your calories. I actually wrote a book that says, don't count calories. You need to start eating food and not worrying about calories. So I just want people to know that the narrative it's not making sense, and I don't think it's making people healthy. So challenge it, think about it, critically think, and sort it out for yourself.
I appreciate you sharing that. Very important 4 points, and also that kind of life experience there, and just appreciate your passion and willingness to share your knowledge. With that being said, if anybody listening to this podcast would like to kind of get in contact with you or just get more of your books, your articles, how can they learn more about you?
Yeah, so I've got a website, which is just my name, which is on the screen there. ZoeHarcombe.com is the website. There's quite a lot on OpenView. I mean, my business model to be able to put red meat on the table is the Monday Note, and it's not even £1 a week, and you get the dissections. But I do put a good number, and certainly some of the older ones, some of those red meat dissections would definitely be on OpenView. I'm on Twitter. I have been quite animated on Twitter at various times, and then I become less animated on Twitter at other times, kind of a little bit now really, because when the world kind of goes into a bad place, I kind of I don't know, with stuff that's going on, and we know when we're recording this, and we know the stuff that's going on at the moment, and you just think, sort of putting a tweet out about fibre just seems a bit irrelevant really when people are dying. And I mean, we've always got war in the world, and I just hate war above everything. But I'll be back, don't we? In a few days it'll be like, no, saturated fat is important, and nutrition is important, and staying healthy is important, and trying to give positive messages as well. Hopefully I do a few of those, and whatever. So it's my website or it's Twitter. Those are the main ones.
Great. And I'll put those in the show notes. And I really appreciate the conversation that we had today and all the knowledge you shared. I'd love to have you on in the future sometime to continue talking about other topics. One that we didn't get around to is salt, just kind of dive deeper in that. And also just hormonal health. I think it's something so big that we as MDs just don't know. Like, we know kind of like, side effects of hormonal treatment, and then that's kind of it. Instead of the nuances and how diet can influence hormonal health. So maybe in the future we can delve into that. But thank you very much. And I hope you have a great day.
Thank you very much as well, actually. I mean, people should realise we don't know each other. I mean, you just reached out to me, you emailed me, I emailed back, said, thank you for the invite, let's do this. And then we get a date and we work out the time difference. And it's been like we've been out having a coffee, and okay, I've done most of the talking because you're the host and I'm the guest or whatever. But it always amazes me how in the field, kind of, we're tribe members, aren't we? We're tribe members who've realised that the food advice is wrong. And when you meet another tribe member, whatever your tribe is, you just connect with them immediately. And I think that's a lovely thing about finding your tribe and then being part of it. So I just wanted to make that observation as well.
Yeah, I agree, and I'm so appreciative of the mentors in the tribe, being like such as yourself, being willing to take some time and share some more knowledge to those who just don't know but are thirsty to learn some more.
That's very nice. Thank you.